Settle in, dear listener, and let your breathing slow as we begin tonight's journey together. Over the next 2 hours, we'll walk through the mists of time to a land where empires met their match, where ancient stones still whisper secrets, and where the very earth itself seemed to breathe with defiance. This is Scotland, but not the Scotland of maps and borders you know today. This is the Scotland of 2,000 years ago, when the most powerful empire the world had ever seen marched northward with banners raised high, and then faltered. Imagine you're with those soldiers now. You've marched with legions across deserts that shimmer with heat, through forests that seemed endless, over mountains where the air itself grew thin. Every time, Rome triumphed. Roads were carved, villas were planted, and the eagle standard soared. But here, at the northern edge of Britain, the bravest empire in the world hesitates. The men who conquered Gaul, Germania, Judea, even Carthage itself, pause. And finally, for once, they say, perhaps not. And that, in itself, is the story we are about to enter. A story of land as a weapon, of people who refuse to bow, and of an empire forced, at last, to draw a line. You stand now at the edge of that line. The grass is wet beneath your sandals, the air heavy with mist that clings like a second skin. Behind you lies the comfort of Roman order, paved roads stretching like veins across the land, warm baths steaming in the evening air, amphitheaters alive with laughter and blood. But ahead? Ahead is another world entirely. Fog curls low across marshland, reeds sway where no wind seems to move them, and silence sits thick as wool. This isn't the Britain Rome liked to display in mosaics and marble. This is the other Britain, the Britain that smelt of peat smoke, tasted of salt spray, and pressed itself against your senses with a weight that felt almost supernatural. Rome had declared Britannia conquered in AD 43. Emperor Claudius, hungry for triumph, sent his legions across the channel, and with their usual precision, they shattered the southern tribes. Cities rose, villas gleamed, Roman life, minus the Italian sunshine, took hold. But even then, the soldiers whispered that beyond the villas, beyond the neatly laid roads, there stretched another land. A land Rome could not tame. That land was called Caledonia. Even the word carried a hiss, like the drawing of a blade. You might expect Rome to treat Caledonia as it had Gaul or Germania, another campaign, another victory, another province to add to the map. But no. From the beginning, stories spread like wildfire, units vanishing in marsh fog, scouts reporting villages that seemed to disappear overnight, commanders muttering that their men were not just uneasy, but broken in spirit. You step into that in-between space tonight, the liminal border where Rome ends and Caledonia begins. Immediately, the air feels heavier. The land breathes differently here. Dampness clings to your lungs, carrying the bitter tang of peat fires and distant sea spray. Your sandals sink an inch into the ground, squelching with every step. The roads Rome promised as eternal and unbreakable end abruptly here, swallowed by mud tracks that seem to twist on their own accord. Every path feels like a trick. Every turn seems to lead you deeper into a maze meant to swallow you whole. And perhaps that wasn't paranoia. Perhaps it was simply the land doing what the land had always done, resisting. Historians still debate whether Rome truly intended to conquer the far north. Some argue that Governor Agricola, in the late 70s AD, marched his legions deep into Caledonia, even claiming a grand victory at Mons Graupius. But here's the puzzle. No one can agree where that battle happened. Some whisper it never happened at all. What we do know is this. If Agricola had truly crushed the tribes, Rome would have left its mark, as it always did. Forts, cities, roads, colonies. But here, nothing. Just silence. Just land that refused to change. Look closer into the mist. The marshes hide more than they reveal. A trickle of water whispers where no stream can be found. A hunched shape looms ahead, but when you approach, it's only a twisted tree stump. And always, there's movement at the corner of your vision. Shadows darting, vanishing, reappearing. Are they tribesmen watching you? Or is it simply the mind unraveling in this endless fog? Either way, your hand drifts toward the spear at your side. Rome liked to say it wasn't superstitious. Its gods were orderly, bureaucratic, as neat as any tax ledger. But here, even hardened centurions muttered about curses. Ancient writers claimed Britain produced vegetables of monstrous size, leeks and cabbages so vast they seemed swollen, unnatural. A curious detail, but unsettling if you thought about it. If crops could grow distorted and unnatural in the soil, what else might the land itself be nurturing in its shadows? And so, you breathe in the damp air, hear distant cries that sound not quite human, and realize that though Rome insists this is its soil, your gut tells you otherwise. You've stepped beyond Roman Britain now. You've entered the island Rome refused to tame. And as the silence folds around you like a cloak, you take your first cautious step deeper into the mist. The mist loosens just enough for you to glimpse what lies ahead. The sea stretches out gray and restless, its waves gnawing endlessly at cliffs so dark they look less like stone and more like the bones of the earth forced upward. Salt spray lashes your face, sharp and stinging, while gulls scream overhead with a voice that sounds almost mocking. There it is, the coast of Caledonia, the place the Romans whispered about in officers' tents, the shoreline sailors described with dread, the edge of the map where the empire's certainty began to crumble. At first glance, it's just a bleak coast, ridges of rock, water hammering endlessly against them. But the longer you stare, the more wrong it feels. This is no friendly shore, no golden sands for landing, no gentle coves for safe harbors. The coastline stands like a barricade, designed not just by nature, but by something with intent, something determined to keep outsiders away. Black basalt rises in jagged towers, columns warped into eerie geometric patterns, as though giants once shaped them into fortresses no human hand could breach. The cliffs climb too high to scale, too sheer to tempt even Rome's boldest engineers. Even before tribesmen lost an arrow or raised a spear, the land itself told the Romans, turn back. The sailors who braved these waters brought stories back to campfires. They told of reefs lying in wait beneath the surface, ready to split a galley's hull. They spoke of currents that pulled ships sideways as if by a hidden hand, of sudden fogs that swallowed fleets whole. One chronicler confessed the northern seas felt alive, as though Neptune himself had stationed guardians to keep Rome out. Picture the legionaries who sailed toward this coast for the first time. On deck, they stood rigid, helmets polished, their discipline unshaken in appearance. Yet inside their helmets, sweat trickled. It's one thing to march toward an enemy you can see, men with swords, men with shields. It's another thing entirely to face a coastline that looks intent on devouring you whole. And then the rumor spread. Shapes spotted on the cliffs at dusk. Tall, motionless figures watching the ships creep closer. Were they warriors, statues, spirits carved out of stone? No one could agree, but the impression lingered. This was no ordinary shore. It was a threshold, a border between Rome's known world and something older, wilder, unclaimed. Rome itself seemed to admit it. In art and propaganda, Britannia was sometimes drawn as a woman in chains, subdued, conquered. But Caledonia? She appeared fierce, wild-haired, spear clutched tight, eyes blazing with defiance. Even in their propaganda, Rome could not force her into submission. The wind sharpens, cutting through your cloak. The cry of gulls turns harsher, bending into something that sounds less like bird call and more like laughter. The cliffs howl with the storm's voice, creating a chorus of low moans that slide into your bones. It's easy to understand why legionaries began muttering about ghosts. These were men who believed the underworld had real entrances, caves in Italy, volcanic pits in Greece. Why wouldn't they believe the northern clefts of Caledonia were another gateway to Hades? Modern historians still debate whether Rome's fear was superstition or strategy. Perhaps it was easier to say the gods forbid it than to admit we couldn't land a ship. Yet whatever the reasoning, fear has a way of becoming true when it spreads through an army. Once soldiers believe a coast is cursed, every crash of thunder, every shadow on a cliff becomes proof. The mist closes around you again, swallowing the black cliffs, but the feeling lingers. You don't just remember what you saw, you feel it deep in your chest. A coastline that rejects you, a land that looks back with hostility, a place where even the greatest empire in the world cannot shake the sense that it has arrived uninvited. You can conquer men, you can conquer cities, but how do you conquer a shore that fights you before you've even set foot upon it? You pull your cloak tighter, boots sinking into wet sand, and realize something unsettling. This journey might not be about fighting tribes at all. It might be about fighting the land itself. The mist parts just enough to show you something different this time. Not cliffs or shifting water, but people. Across the ridge they move, figures daubed in streaks of blue, their hair stiffened with lime, their bodies lean and taut from a life lived outdoors. These were no legionaries with matching armor and disciplined ranks. These are the tribes of the empire called Caledoni. To Rome, they were barbarians. To you, standing here in their shadow, they look like warriors stepped out of legend. What strikes you first is not their weapons, but their silence. They move like creatures born of the hills, vanishing into bracken, only to appear again in places you weren't watching. Every step you take echoes in mud, clumsy and loud, while they glide across the same ground without sound. Blink too long and they are gone. Only the chill sensation of being observed remains. Roman writers, eager to diminish them, painted them as primitive. Tacitus, son-in-law of Agricola, called them fierce but inferior. And yet, here lies the irony. These so-called primitives handed Rome some of its hardest lessons north of Hadrian's Wall. The legions expected orderly fields of battle, tight formations, predictable clashes. Instead, they faced fighters who struck like shadows, melted into bogs, and used the land itself as a weapon. To the Romans, this wasn't war, it was being hunted. And then there was the paint. Warriors streaked their skin with woad, a deep blue that glowed eerily in torchlight or moonlight. Imagine the scene, a night patrol trudging through fog, when suddenly figures daubed in ghostly blue burst from the mist, eyes blazing, hair stiff and pale, voices shrieking like spirits. For men drilled to face organized, disciplined enemies, this was terror incarnate. They weren't fighting men, they were fighting apparitions. Historians still debate the purpose of the paint. Was it meant to intimidate? To heal wounds? Some argue it burned the skin, driving warriors into a frenzy of pain and adrenaline. Whether ritual or medicine, the effect was undeniable. Rome feared these painted figures the way modern people fear masked strangers in the dark. Something about a hidden self gnawed at the imagination. One name often appears in Roman accounts, the Picts. The very word comes from Picti, the painted ones. Even in their disdain, the Romans admitted these people were unforgettable. They could dismiss them as savages, but they could not erase them. You imagine drawing closer, maybe even attempting to speak, but a language barrier is only the first wall. These people belong to a world of ritual and myth, of oral traditions that root their identity into soil, stone, and story. A chieftain lifts his spear, not adorned with polished brass or eagle standards, but with carved symbols, feathers, and charms. Every detail hums with meaning you cannot translate. He doesn't need legions behind him. His army is the land itself, the rivers, the forests, the fog. Rome hated that. You can sense it in their writings. They could conquer cities, pave roads, and impose laws, but they could not pave over this connection between people and earth. Every time Rome claimed a victory, the tribes simply melted into mist and returned when the season turned. There was no final triumph here, only the constant reminder that conquest was temporary, fragile, an illusion. A soldier once muttered that fighting in Caledonia was like fighting ghosts. Watching those painted figures slip soundlessly back into the trees, you understand. Their silence unnerves you more than a battle cry ever could. Because ghosts don't play by the rules of the empire. Ghosts don't bow to emperors. Ghosts wait, patient, ready to return again and again. You take another step, the mud clinging to your sandals, and realize something chilling. Rome could conquer men, but here it faced warriors who fought like memories, impossible to kill, impossible to forget. The mist thickens as you follow a faint trail deeper into the hills, until suddenly the trees draw back and reveal something startling. Rising from the earth are vast stones, weathered and ancient, standing in deliberate circles older than Rome itself. Spirals, hollows, and carvings ripple across their faces, shapes that seem to hum with forgotten purpose. You've stumbled into a sanctuary, a place where men gather not to fight, but to speak with the gods. At first glance, it seems quiet, but then listen closer. The low flicker of torches, the sharp tang of peat smoke curling into the night air, the rhythmic murmur of voices carried on the wind. A crowd gathers between the stones, warriors, elders, cloaked women, all turning toward a single figure at the center, a druid. Rome despised druids. Officially, they outlawed them across the empire, calling them agitators. Unofficially, they feared them. Because druids weren't just priests, they were healers, judges, keepers of memory, and most unsettling of all, voices of unseen powers. To a Roman soldier raised on order and ritual, a druid's whispered curse could feel more dangerous than a drawn blade. The one before you raises his arms, chanting words older than Latin, his voice rolling like thunder across the stones. The people respond with a beat of feet on earth, the sound deep and relentless. The flames flare higher, shadows racing over carved spirals so they seem to twist and writhe like living things. Roman writers accuse druids of practicing human sacrifice, claiming they stuffed victims into wicker giants and burned them alive. Was it true? Or was it a story Rome spread to justify cutting the groves and slaughtering the priests? Historians argue still. After all, nothing strengthens an invasion quite like saying, "We put an end to savagery." But standing here, in this circle of firelight and chant, you can see why the rumors thrived. The air vibrates with something uncanny, something that unsettles even without proof. Whatever it was, magic or performance, the effect was real. You feel it crawling over your skin. The circle isn't just architecture, it's theater, politics, religion, and resistance bound into one. Each symbol carved into rock whispers, "We are older than Rome, we are children of this land, and we do not forget." The druid lowers his arms. Silence falls like a weight. Into that silence steps a painted warrior, scarred and wild-eyed, his spear glinting in the firelight. He kneels. The druid touches his head, murmuring words you cannot grasp. Blessing? Curse? Perhaps both. You realize then that this ritual is not just faith, it is armor. It forges courage stronger than iron, binding men to their ancestors, to their land, to each other. Rome hated that most of all. A legionary could face a man with steel. But how do you fight a man who believes the spirits themselves march at his side? How do you conquer an idea? You watch the flames dance higher, the chants rise again, and the strange thought comes to you. Rome called itself eternal, inevitable, destined to rule all. But here, in this circle older than their empire, eternity hums in another voice, a voice that does not march in straight roads or bow to marble statues, but one that endures in stone, soil, and song. And suddenly you understand why Rome's victories here never lasted. You cannot conquer what refuses to live only in flesh. You cannot kill a people whose power lies in belief. The chanting grows louder, the earth itself trembling with the rhythm. You feel your chest tighten, your heart quicken, and though you stand outside the circle, the message is clear. This is not Rome's land. It never will be. You leave the stone circle behind, and the land changes once again. Hills slope upward into forests so thick they feel endless, an ancient green wall where even light struggles to enter. The trunks are twisted with age, their roots gripping earth like veins. The air is heavy with pine and damp moss, but beneath it lingers something sharper, resin, fungus, a medicinal tang that makes the forest smell alive in ways both comforting and uncanny. The Romans had a phrase for such places, silva horrida, terrible woods. Not merely descriptive, but a warning. To them, forests were more than obstacles. They were hiding places for rebels, labyrinths that swallowed formations whole, and, perhaps worst of all, symbols of a world Rome could never tame. North of their walls, this wilderness stretched vast and unmapped, too broad for any surveyor's parchment, too old for any Roman to claim. You step carefully through it now. Ferns brush against your legs, and the ground is soft with centuries of fallen leaves. Strange noises ripple all around, the harsh caw of ravens, the scurry of unseen animals, the crack of a branch that sounds deliberate enough to quicken your pulse. No wonder the legions muttered curses when ordered into these woods. Armies trained to march shoulder to shoulder suddenly found themselves scattered, their discipline wasted beneath a canopy that made order impossible. But the forest wasn't merely a military problem, it was also a living armory for the tribes. They knew its plants like an apothecary knows his jars. Some herbs soothed pain, others closed wounds, still others could kill with a single drop. And there were stranger things. Writers tell of mad honey gathered in the north, its nectar laced with poison from certain flowers. One taste brought dizziness, paralysis, and visions. Imagine a Roman scout stumbling into a feast, reaching for a sweet comb of honey, and waking to a world spinning sideways, too weak to lift his sword. You pause beside a fallen oak, its bark slick with rain. Faint spirals and marks are etched into its trunk. Were they warnings, prayers, territory signs? No one agrees, but they remind you that you are not the first to pass this way, and you are certainly not alone. The deeper you walk, the more oppressive the forest becomes. Branches seem to lean inward, shadows fold into shapes that resemble men, beasts, or something in between. From far off comes a howl, low, ragged, hungry. Not quite wolf, not quite anything you've heard before. Imagine a Roman patrol halting at that sound, torches shaking in the dark. They had fought lions and bears in arenas, but this was something different. Something that did not belong to entertainment or spectacle, but to the land itself. Then, silence. a silence so thick it presses on your chest, louder than any noise. Your heartbeat pounds in your ears. Every crunch of your boot feels like a shout. The forest listens, and in that listening, you grasp why Roman commanders dreaded it. Discipline works when men believe their leaders control the field. But here, under these ancient branches, no commander controls anything. The forest itself decides who emerges alive. So you walk on, senses sharp, knowing eyes are upon you. Behind you, the empire feels impossibly far away. Ahead of you, the trees whisper of ages older than marble or eagle standards. You do not stop, because to stop here would feel like surrender. The trees fall away, and suddenly the horizon opens wide to the sea. But it isn't the cliffs this time that hold your gaze, it's the sky itself. Clouds tower above, bruised purple and green, roiling with a force that feels alive. The wind leaps at you, tugging at your cloak, howling through the gaps between hills. Within moments, the gray day collapses into chaos. This is how it was, again and again. Fleets ordered north, sails full of Rome's ambition, rowers steady at their benches, only to vanish under storms so sudden and violent that survivors swore the sea itself was cursed. A Roman admiral once groaned that it wasn't the tribes who defeated him, but Neptune himself. And sailors, who lived closer to gods than generals ever did, muttered that Caledonia's deities guarded their shores more fiercely than any warrior could. Picture it, a proud line of galleys cutting the waves, eagle standards snapping bright against the horizon. Then, without warning, the wind twists. The sea heaves sideways, oars shatter out of rhythm, the rain slams down so hard it stings like arrows. Crews panic, ships smash into one another, timbers crack like bones, and proud vessels break apart on reefs no map ever warned of. By dawn, the fleet is nothing but wreckage washing up on hostile shores. And the survivors? Those who dragged themselves ashore often vanished into fog. Some whispered they were ambushed by tribes waiting with spears. Others swore the bogs themselves swallowed men alive, mud clutching at their legs until they sank. Whatever the truth, one lesson spread quickly. The sea did not want Rome crossing north. There's even a curious note in Roman calendars. Days were marked as dies Fausti or nefasti, lucky or unlucky. For northern Britain, whole seasons seemed branded unlucky. Sailors joked that if you saw the sun 3 days in a row, you must have strayed too far south. It was a bitter joke when you were clinging to driftwood in freezing waters. Modern historians still argue, was it truly the weather that stopped Rome, or was weather just a convenient excuse? After all, it is easier to tell the Senate that Neptune himself barred your way than to admit that a handful of tribes could resist the greatest empire. Yet the record of failure piles high. Agricola's fleets battered, Severus's expeditions losing ships before even making landfall. Each storm chipped at Rome's illusion of invincibility. Now, standing in that storm yourself, you feel its weight. Rain lashes your face, soaks through wool and leather until every step drags heavy. The salt stings your lips, the thunder rolls with a voice so vast it makes your bones tremble. You see, suddenly, why soldiers muttered about curses, why commanders hesitated, why maps of the north stayed hazy and incomplete. Because how do you conquer an island that fights you not with men, but with the sky itself? The thunder crashes again, deep and ancient, like the laughter of something that has seen empires rise and fall. You pull your cloak tighter and press forward into the downpour, one thought pounding with every heartbeat. Caledonia does not want you here, and she has the storm to prove it. The storm passes, leaving behind a silence raw and uneasy, as though the land itself is pausing to breathe. Mist curls low across the boggy trail, and the hush is broken only by whispers carried back from Roman camps. This land is guarded not only by warriors, but by beasts. Your eyes catch a shadow moving along a ridge, broad-shouldered, heavy-jawed, four-legged, too large, too deliberate to be an ordinary wolf. It pauses, lifts its head, and for a heartbeat you see teeth meant for bone, eyes glowing faint in the dim light. The tribes tell stories of wolves so massive they could pull down oxen, vanish into the trees with half a carcass still clenched in their jaws. Roman soldiers, used to the lean, familiar wolves of Italy, felt a chill at the thought. Here, the wolves were not just predators, they were monstrous, cunning, half-spirit. And wolves were not the only whispers. Lakes lay scattered across the land, dark, still, bottomless. Tails clung to them like fog, serpents twisting beneath the water, shadows pulling men down without sound, spirits rising in the night to thunder across the land before slipping back beneath the surface. Some early writers even claimed Caledonia harbored water bulls, creatures that surged out of locks to trample fields before vanishing back into the depths. Myth? Likely. But if you were half asleep on guard duty and heard thunder where there should be none, would you swear it wasn't real? And then there were stories stranger still, of men who could become beasts. Shapeshifters, the tribes claimed. Warriors who donned skins of stags or ravens, who blurred the line between man and animal. Was it mere disguise, clever intimidation, or did it run deeper, born from rituals Rome could not name? Historians argue still, but what mattered was not fact, it was fear. To Roman soldiers, every shadow could hide not just an enemy, but something less than human, and more. You press deeper into the bog, the ground sucking at your boots with every step. Each squelch feels too loud, as though announcing you. Imagine marching here in armor, your sandals drowning in mud, while unseen eyes glimmer just beyond the mist. One man slips, waist deep, clawing upward as muck pulls him down. Another disappears entirely, and no one dares follow. Then, a pair of eyes catch the torchlight, too high off the ground to be human, too still to belong to anything friendly. The tribes carried these stories like weapons. Rome could boast of lions in its arenas, leopards in its hunts, elephants paraded through triumphal arches. The Caledonians could answer, "We have beasts Rome cannot name." And in that answer was a power sharper than any spear, because fear of the unknown bites deeper than fear of the familiar. A cry tears through the mist now, high, piercing, unearthly. It is neither wolf nor bird, but something in between. Your skin prickles, your grip tightens on your spear. And in that moment, you understand how soldiers felt, hunted not just by men, but by a bestiary of nightmares. Here in Caledonia, Rome was not at war with tribes alone. Rome was at war with the wild itself. Now, imagine yourself in their sandals, a Roman soldier, boots caked with mud, armor chafing with damp. The road beneath you is no road at all, only a boggy path twisting between bracken and stone. You've been told this is a campaign, a pacification of northern tribes. But if this is war, it is unlike any war you fought before. There are no walls to besiege, no great cities to batter open with rams and towers, no open fields where formations clash in the glory Rome prefers. Here, the enemy fights differently. They vanish into forests your cavalry cannot enter. They slip into bogs where your armor drags you down. They reappear at night with horns and cries that pierce sleep like knives. The Caledonians do not fight to win battles in the Roman sense. They fight to exhaust you, to break you piece by piece, season by season. A century of men lost not to decisive clashes, but to ambushes and ravines, poisoned arrows tipped with swamp water, rolling boulders thundering down from unseen ridges. Every shadow hides an enemy, every tree could be a trap. You march all day to find nothing, only to hear screams behind you as your supply wagons go up in flame. Rome, proud of its order, called this bellum sine muris, war without walls. But for those inside it, the name was too neat. It felt less like war, more like a curse. The endless waiting, the paranoia, the sense that the land itself was conspiring. You can drill soldiers to face swords and spears, but how do you drill them to face silence, to face shadows that move, to face a people who never stand still long enough to be crushed? Even the veterans whispered, "These enemies do not fight like men," they said. "They fight like ghosts." And perhaps that was the point. Because ghosts do not die. They fade, they vanish, and then they return. And so here you are, trudging through mud with sword and shield, listening for every sound, waiting for the next strike, not knowing whether you'll face warriors of flesh or figures of mist. And with every passing night, the suspicion grows stronger. Perhaps Rome's greatest enemy in Caledonia was not warriors at all. Perhaps it was the land teaching men how to become shadows. Night falls again, but here in the north, it doesn't arrive gently. It seeps into the hills like ink in water, filling every hollow, every ridge. You stand in the ruins of a Roman camp, grass sprouting through the stones of collapsed walls, spearheads rusting half buried in the soil. The silence here is not peace. It is too thick, too heavy, as though something unseen waits just beyond your hearing. And then you hear it, a cry. Not the call of an animal or bird, but the ragged wail of a human throat stretched to its limit. It rises across the heather, thin and trembling with terror. You're certain someone lingers, wounded, desperate. But when you turn toward the sound, there is nothing. Only mist, only emptiness, only echoes. The Romans recorded this too. Hardened men, veterans of Parthia and Judea, men who had faced rebels, slaves, and deserts, swore that the northern fields were haunted. Entire cohorts whispered of voices drifting through the night. Some said they heard their comrades crying out in Latin, men long dead, their bodies swallowed by bogs, or left unburied on lonely hillsides. Others claimed the cries weren't human at all, but the land itself screaming against invasion. Were they ghosts, or memories thick enough to breathe? Think of the battles fought here, now invisible, but imprinted on every blade of grass. Roman lines locking shields, marching into valleys. Painted warriors shrieking from the trees, arrows raining unseen, rocks tumbling from ridgelines. Panic spreading, the formation crumbling, men swallowed by mist and silence. And then, the stillness after, a silence so complete it seemed permanent. That is the silence you stand in now. Even Rome's discipline cracked under it. Some soldiers deserted, not from hunger or wounds, but because they could not endure the nights. They refused to sleep under open skies. A few swore that even the stars were wrong here, twisted in their patterns, flickering like lights from another world. War was not fought with steel alone. It was fought with fear, with imagination, with the weight of a land that refused to forget. You take a step through the ruins, and the bog beneath you sighs, as if exhaling something buried deep. For a moment, you glimpse a figure on the ridge, a centurion, his armor faintly glowing in moonlight, his red crest bright against the dark. You blink. The figure is gone. But still you hear it, the crunch of iron-shod sandals in the heather, marching not behind you, not ahead of you, but all around. You are not walking alone. You are marching beside legions that never left. And the question creeps into your mind, the same one that gnawed at Rome's commanders. Are these just memories, hallucinations from fear and fatigue? Or does Caledonia hold on to its dead, keeping them here, turning their cries into weapons against every intruder? You shiver, you breathe deep, you take another step forward. Because what Rome feared next was not only the spirits of the fallen, but the living sorcery of those who still called this land home. You are a Roman officer, sworn to Jupiter and Mars, trained to believe in order, reason, and discipline. You've seen campaigns in Gaul, in Germania, in Judea. You know how battles are won, with steel, with tactics, with sheer endurance. But here, in the damp breath of Caledonia's mists, reason begins to fray. Because your enemy does not fight only with spears, they fight with dread. At the edges of the battlefield, cloaked figures stand, Druids, their presence as unnerving as any army. Their chants rise above the clash of swords, low and rolling like distant thunder. They lift their hands, and men swear the wind shifts, the ravens circle closer, the very ground trembles beneath their feet. Your soldiers whisper that Druids can call storms, curse arrows so they always strike true, or seal wounds so they never heal. After one skirmish, you take a young prisoner, barely more than a boy. He bleeds from a deep cut, yet he laughs. He spits words none of your men understand. Then, without warning, the torches sputter and go out, all at once, leaving only the sound of his laughter in the dark. It is said the Druids know which warriors will die before the battle even begins, that they carve names into you, burn them in smoke, and offer them as promises to their gods. Soldiers who believe their death is already chosen fight with a kind of madness Rome has no counter for. Rome does not fear men. Rome fears the unknown. And here, the unknown takes the shape of sorcery. So what do? You follow orders. You burn the groves sacred to the Druids. You cut down the oak trees they worship. You scatter their stones, drown their chants in fire and steel. But destroying a place does not destroy a fear. Every time the wind howls through the Highlands, every time the ravens gather, your soldiers remember. They are not only fighting men, they are fighting spells. And spells cannot be stabbed. You realize, with a weight like lead in your chest, that you are not just waging war against tribes, you are waging war against belief itself. And belief, unlike men, cannot be conquered on a battlefield. You've seen the fog, the forests, the storms, the Druids. Now you watch as Rome itself tries again and again to master this impossible land, and fails. First comes Gnaeus Julius Agricola, governor of Britain in the late 1st century. He knows Britain is an island at the edge of the known world, half conquered, half feral. But Agricola is ambitious. He dreams of being the man who pushes further than anyone before, the one who will make Caledonia bow. At first, it seems he might succeed. He strikes fast, marching legions northward into land that swallows sandals whole. He boasts of raids, of villages burned, of victories claimed. Then comes the famous Battle of Mons Graupius, at least famous according to Tacitus, his son-in-law. Tacitus paints a grand picture: the Caledonians slaughtered, Agricola triumphant, the frontier secured. But history is written by relatives as well as victors. Tacitus wasn't there, and his account reads more like a family tribute than a war report. Because despite this decisive victory, Rome never plants its flag in the Highlands. No colonies, no roads, no cities. Agricola is recalled to Rome, and the north remains untamed, mist curling over its hills as if nothing had happened. A century later, another emperor takes his turn. Septimius Severus, already old, already sick, arrived in Britain around 208 CE. His body betrays him. His doctors plead for rest. But emperors do not rest. Emperors conquer. He has no intention of being remembered as the man who hesitated at the edge of the empire. He drags himself northward in a litter, coughing blood, commanding tens of thousands of men into Caledonia's jaws. What follows is not battle, but attrition. Ambushes in forests, men lost in bogs, disease spreading faster than formations can hold. Romans called it Bellum Sylvestre, the War of the Woods, a name as bleak as the reality. Estimates say Severus may have lost 50,000 men, not to glorious clashes, but to fever, hunger, endless skirmishes. The Highlands ground his army down as surely as waves grind stone. And when Severus finally broke, it wasn't from a Caledonian spear, but from sickness. He died in York in 211 CE, leaving nothing behind but graves and the bitter memory of a campaign that devoured more than it won. This was the pattern. Rome tried, Rome failed. Not because the Caledonians were stronger in arms, but because the land itself was unyielding. The marshes, the storms, the hills, they wore down legions like water wearing stone. And yet Rome never admitted defeat. You won't find an inscription that says, "We tried and failed." Instead, Rome rewrote its history. "We chose not to annex the north," they said. "It was more efficient to draw a line." And so, Hadrian's Wall rose. Later, Antoninus would try pushing farther with his own wall, but even that collapsed within 20 years. The walls remain, not as monuments of conquest, but of retreat. For the first and only time, Rome, the empire that devoured the world, looked at a land and said, "No, not worth it." It was the kind of defeat you didn't stamp on coins or carve in marble, the kind you buried in silence. But the silence speaks all the same. Because when the legions turned back and left their walls to guard empty hills, the Highlands kept breathing. And long after emperors were dust, the mist still rolled across the heather, whispering that here, at the edge of empire, Rome had met its match. Step now beyond Rome's reach. Past Hadrian's Wall, past Antoninus's short-lived line of forts, and you enter a world that Rome never mapped fully, never tamed. For centuries, they stared northward from their stone barriers, peering into a land they called hostile, unknowable. But life thrived there, just not in the way Rome measured. Villages clung to ridges and valleys, clusters of round houses with thatched roofs, their smoke spiraling into skies forever thick with weather. Children chased one another barefoot through bracken, their laughter carrying farther than any war horn. Herds of cattle grazed along slopes, watched over by shepherds who knew every dip of the hills, every trick of the mist. The tribes lived close to the land because the land demanded it. Fields were cleared with effort, tilled with wooden plows drawn by oxen. Grain grew stubbornly in the thin soil, barley, oats, rye, but where fields failed, the forests and lochs provided. Salmon throned in the rivers, deer filled the woods, honey sweetened the bitter days of winter. To outsiders, it may have seemed a life of poverty, but within it lay resilience. No one waited for shipments of olive oil or wine. No one depended on trade routes stretching across seas. Their wealth was measured in kinship, in cattle, in stories, told by firelight that stretched memory back through generations. And always, at the center of community, there were rituals. Festivals tied to solstices, to harvests, to hunts. Fires lit on hilltops to mark the turning of seasons. Circles of stone still older than memory, visited not as ruins but as living places of power. Every carving in those stones whispered, "You belong to something vast, something rooted deeper than empire." Rome could never understand this kind of wealth. To them, a conquered land meant towns built in stone, markets buzzing, taxes flowing back to the capital. But north of the walls, life remained stubbornly unmonumental, woven into soil, water, and sky. And that very refusal to reshape itself was a kind of victory. You picture a Roman patrol glimpsing such a village from afar. Smoke rising, laughter carrying faintly through the mist, a dog barking sharp in the distance. Nothing to conquer, nothing to burn that would bring glory and a triumph. Just people living their lives, in rhythms too ancient to be broken by empire. And here is the truth Rome never carved into their inscriptions. These people endured. The walls fell into ruin, the legions marched away, recalled to crises elsewhere. But the roundhouses, the herds, the songs by the fire, they outlasted marble, outlasted emperors, outlasted the very memory of Rome's attempts to erase them. When the empire turned its back, the Caledonians did not vanish. They kept living. They kept telling stories. They kept walking through their mist-cloaked hills, free of the empire's shadow. And in time, they would earn a new name, one whispered first by Rome, then carried forward through centuries, the Picts, the Painted Ones, still elusive, still mysterious, still their own. Here, north of the walls, the story of Rome ended. But the story of the Caledonians was only beginning. The stones still stand. Hadrian's Wall, Antonine's Wall, silent lines stretching across hills and valleys, broken but not gone. To tourists, they seem ancient curiosities, relics of another age. But to the men who built them, they were not curiosities at all. They were lifelines. Hadrian's Wall, built in the 120s CE, rose across northern Britain like a scar. 70 miles of stone and turf, punctuated with mile castles, turrets, forts. To Roman eyes, it was a frontier. To Caledonians, it was a cage. For whom? Not the tribes beyond, but the soldiers within. Imagine it, stationed on the wall, looking north into endless mist. You've marched across Europe, fought Parthians, Germans, Dacians. But here you sit in rain, staring at hills that never stop breathing fog. You wait, always wait, for raids that come like shadows, swift, brutal, gone. You light your signal fires, send for help, chase the raider south, and return to find your comrades dead and your walls mocked by silence. Later came Antoninus, who dared to push farther north. His wall stretched only 37 miles, a thinner scar across the waste of the land. But it was fragile from the start. Less than 20 years after its completion, it was abandoned. The Caledonians had pressed too hard, too often. Rome withdrew, tail tucked, back to Hadrian's older, stronger line. And so it remained. For centuries, Hadrian's Wall marked not Rome's triumphs, but Rome's limit. The empire that claimed the world could not claim the Highlands. The walls became less fortifications than admissions. Here we stop. Beyond this, we cannot hold. Think of that irony. Rome prided itself on roads, on aqueducts, on monuments proclaiming eternity. But here, its greatest monuments are walls of retreat. Stones that say, not we conquered, but we failed. And yet, in failing, they left something strange behind. The walls outlasted the empire. They became borders not just of land, but of imagination. Even centuries later, kings, armies, and farmers measured themselves against those stones. They endured while Rome crumbled, while emperors faded into dust, while the tribes they feared gave rise to new names, new nations. So when you stand on the ruins today, running your hand along weathered blocks, you are not touching victory. You are touching Rome's surrender. You are touching the place where the empire admitted, without ever saying it aloud, this far no farther. And north of those stones, the Caledonians lived on, painted, fierce, hidden in mist, unbowed. The walls did not keep them out. The walls only kept Rome in. Centuries slide past. Rome fades. The legions march away for the last time, their eagles carried back across the sea, their walls left to weather and crumble. Empires elsewhere rise and fall, but the Highlands remain, cloaked in the same mist that baffled and broke the Romans. And yet, Rome never entirely left. Its memory clings like smoke. Stories of battles fought and lost echo in the hills. In the whispers of streams, in the shifting of fog, you still hear the tramp of sandals, the clash of shields, the cries of men who thought the world was theirs. Farmers stumble on rusted spearheads in their fields. Shepherds lead flocks past crumbled forts, the stones half buried under grass. Children play among the ruins without knowing they are walking through the graveyards of the empire. The Caledonians themselves change names, change forms, but never vanish. Romans had called them Picti, the painted ones. Later chroniclers spoke of Scots, of Gaels, of Highland clans. But beneath every new name runs the same current, a people defined not by conquest, but by resistance. And so the stories linger, that wolves larger than horses once prowled these glens, that lochs still hold serpents too vast to imagine, that druids called storms with their voices, curses with their fires, that painted warriors rose from the heather with eyes glowing like embers. These tales did not fade when Rome withdrew, they grew stronger. For without Rome to contest them, they became the truth of the land. You stand now on a ridge, looking north. Mist curls upward, swallowing the mountains in a slow, patient embrace. The same mist that once made soldiers tremble still drifts here, unchanged. Close your eyes, and you might believe you hear chanting again, the low hum of voices older than stone. Open them, and for a heartbeat you might see figures daubed in blue slipping between the rocks, watching, waiting. Because that is what lingers most of all, the sense of being watched. The Romans felt it, travelers still feel it. A presence in the land itself, older than the empire, older than walls, something that refuses to be forgotten. Empires are loud. They carve their victories in stone. They march in parades. They proclaim their eternity. But eternity belongs not to empires. It belongs to landscapes, to stories, to people who refuse to bow. And here in the Highlands, eternity still whispers. The Caledonians are gone, and yet they are not. Night settles once more. The stars are cold above the Highlands, their light faint, their silence deep. You lie back on the heather, breathing in the damp air, and realize something unsettling. You are surrounded not by ruins of the empire, but by memories older than empire. The Romans are dust. Their forts, their coins, their inscriptions lie broken, scattered, half swallowed by earth. But the Caledonians, they linger. Not in marble, not in chronicles, but in the stories that still move with the wind, in the silence that still unnerves travelers, in the land itself. Because Caledonia does not forget. Every bog still holds bones. Every loch still hides shadows. Every circle of stone still hums with voices that once defied emperors. The land keeps all of it, storing memory in water and soil, like a book written not with ink, but with echoes. Lie still long enough and you feel it. The beat of drums buried under silence, the tread of ghostly sandals on the ridge, the sudden cry of painted warriors whose names no stone recorded, yet whose presence has outlasted those carved in marble. Rome once believed it could make the world eternal under its rule, but eternity proved to belong to something else entirely. To mist, to forests, to the stubborn defiance of people who fought not to conquer, but simply to remain. That is the bedtime story Caledonia tells. A story where empires pass like storms, loud but brief. A story where the true victors are not kings or generals, but the nameless, the painted, the forgotten who refuse to vanish. And as your eyes grow heavy, the mist curls closer, wrapping you like a cloak. The land whispers softly, not with words, but with the presence of all it has seen, all it has kept. Sleep, it says. The empire is gone, but the Caledonians remain.